Welcome back to another weekly episode of the Rock Fit Files. I'm Rocky Snyder. This week, my guest is Dr. Chris Meyers, author of Triathlon Training with Power. He's stationed over in Germany, working with the military right now, the Air Force, in fact, but he also coaches a lot of triathletes worldwide. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So tell me a little bit about your background in Florida, going to school back there. I mean, you're retired from the military, and then you went back to school, or did you go to school on like the GI Bill and then and go back into the service?
Yeah, so kind of a little bit of the both, right? So I enlisted in '97 with aspirations to go to medical school, and then I went to the academy in 2000, graduated in 2004. Those aspirations kind of took a backseat because of the towers and the Iraq War. So fell in my platoon. I did a couple of 3 tours to Iraq over my time as an officer, military police officer. So I always had that kind of background. At the academy, I graduated with a degree in chemistry. Definitely different from what I did in the Army, combat arms. But yeah, but going through my time as an officer, I got beat up and just due to the nature of what soldiers do. The PT program's definitely evolved over the past several years compared to when I was in. But that was my original aspirations. Was when I was retired in 2012 due to medical reasons, bad knees, bad back, blown up too many times, wrecking too much. I wanted to eventually go back and try to work with the Army Research Lab up in Natick, Massachusetts, to help revive the PT program. I just have that insight as a soldier, as an officer, from an organizational standpoint, and also living through it. I thought it'd be a unique perspective. So I went through and I did my master's degree at University of Louisiana Monroe. 9 months later, I started my PhD program at Florida State in 2013. And then I kind of fell into human subject research with the Navy, probably my second year at Florida State in the doctoral program, so around 2015. I met the lead researcher, Dr. John Florian. He led the hyperoxic research for the Navy Experimental Dive Unit in Panama City Beach, Florida. For those out there, that's also where the dive school is located for the DoD. It's down there. So it makes sense to have both those entities down there.
Sure.
And they do a lot of the hyperbarics research down there as well. You have it's a national asset. You have the largest hyperbaric chamber down there. Things like 3 stories tall. It's humongous. It's awesome.
The chamber itself? How many people can you fit into a hyperbaric chamber of that size?
The key question is, how many semis can you fit into this thing?
Oh my gosh, that's tremendous.
It's designed. So it was originally designed in the late '60s, where they're doing the deep sea dives, see how deep they can go, and they start doing the ocean floor work and such.
Okay.
And more recently, they've learned that they can fly it, where they're helping to do aviation research as well. So you'll fly with, it's interesting when you're under pressure. You have a lot of the similarities physiologically as you do in the air. So it's really interesting to start seeing those, avenues of paths crossing. It was really neat. I learned a lot down there. The 5 years of the hyperoxic research I did with Dr. Florian and his team. And so with that, I said, after 5 years, it was time to move on, because my time, my doctoral time was up, my post fellowship was up, and so I heard that the U.S. Air Force had been putting together these human performance teams, and so working with Mr. Lindsey Bucklew, he's the program coordinator over in Dayton. I met him I spoke with him during my doctoral time, and I just kept an eye on these things. And the position popped up here in Germany. The opportunity to work with Aspect, Air Force Special Warfare, also known as Aspect War over here in Europe. And it was just all the stars and everything lined up, and we took it.
Wow.
So we're working over here, working with these airmen, these operators. How do you keep pushing the envelope, right? It's against the NES Grenadiers, the cycling team out of England, also Team Sky. Their coach had a saying, it's all about the 1% gains. And every time you add up that 1%, whether it's recovery, nutrition, physiology, fitness, right? They all come together, and eventually you have this much of a gain over your opponents. And it's the same approach here as well. How, with these teams, how can you get better access to care, but how can you bring in these other assets to increase performance?
Such as, what are the other aspects we're talking about?
Yeah, so for me personally, I fill in as the physiologist, the nutritionist, and the strength conditioning coach.
Got it.
But also physical therapy, medical, mental. So you have a couple of different models of the pillars of human performance out there, right?
Gotcha.
And it's all a little bit of a mix, a little bit of a different play on that. And you've got several different models within the DoD across the different services right now, but they're all essentially getting to the same thing: is how can we improve, the human performance of the soldier, airman, marine, marine, and sailor to keep that competitive edge over our opponents.
Gotcha. All right. And now, of course, we should bring up right now, and we'll talk more at length, but you have a book that is all about training triathletes. So
yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So the camera cooperate. Yeah, the camera is not cooperating.
That's all right.
It's called Triathlon Training with Power. What it is so power principle has been around for years. In cycling, we've had power meters on the bike. Within the past almost 10 years now, we've had power meters for running. Well, now the technology is starting to catch up, and you have it for swimming. We're starting to see that a lot of that technology is in its infancy, but there's no,
like wearable technology. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, wearable technology, but in the water. But we also have some dry side or land-based platforms that utilize the power right now. For example, the Vasa swim trainers. They're a swimming erg. They have a power meter on there as well. But for in the water, you have swimming paddles. I would show it to you right now, but I actually have a client in the States using them. It's a little blue paddle. It's made by TrainSense, called the Smart Paddle, and it fits right here on your fingertips. It's only yay big, and it measures flow from the different directions into the pressure gauge inside.
Wow.
It's able to measure force all the way through. So it's not a true power meter, but it's still in the same realm. And so with that in the water, you're able to do back-end analysis and see, look at your force curve, see how you're generating force, how long you're able to keep it, when it drops off. You're able to look at your stroke through all three Cartesian planes. So typically we'd have to stick a camera in the water, follow you with like a GoPro or something, and try to line it up across the different axes to show you. Well, now it's able to measure your movement through the water, and you can see it, post hoc.
And then do you have do you have an ideal, through the sagittal frontal transverse plane, when that hand is stroking through, here is the path it should be taking? And
yes,
go ahead.
Yeah, and in swimming coaches, we when we're talking about front quadrant stroke mechanics, which is the swimming with your arms, is there's an ideal stroke, right? The idea is when you got 5 components of the stroke. Your arm enters the water, that's the extension phase. Then you have what's the catch, right? And a lot of people refer to it as the high elbow. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're increasing your surface area along the arm. Because looking at computational fluid modeling, more specifically through the research of Toussaint back in the early mid 90s, it showed that over 80% of your force is produced just by the hand and the forearm alone. So the more surface area you create, the more you're able to push and more force you create. And so if you look at the shoulder as if it's a crank on a bike, right? You have, the crank on the bike is circular. You can look at your shoulder joint, the AC joint, as that center of that of the bottom bracket, and your arm is that pedal.
Certainly.
And so,
and so
motion.
With the wearable technology, then, do you take their results and compare it to the ideal, and then say, here's where you're low in power, here's where you're exceeding, this is what we need to work on?
Yeah, and with anything, right, is there's going to be little variations.
Sure.
Some people do things a little bit different, and it's not cookie cutter. But what it does, it gives you insights to where you might be able to generate more power. And again, it gives you that insights to be able to push just a little bit further, right? So, for example, we know ideally, when you're going through that catch phase between the 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock position, all the way down to the 5 o'clock, you're going to generate most of your power when you're doing for the front crawl. And so, but if you're cutting off your stroke just a little bit short, you could be losing about 10% power. Well, that's speed, right? And so that will be able to show you. The other part is, can you actually generate a little extra on that push phase? You got the catch, the pull, and the push phase, right? You can always generate a little bit, not a lot, but that could be a difference between a couple of seconds per 100 meter, right? There's that. There's also looking at the timing, right? So we know that there's an ideal stroke, right? It's argued. You've got people that say 30 is the ideal stroke, right? Well, we've got people from Effortless Swimming and some of these other high-end companies that talk about upwards to 90 strokes per minute. You'll find a lot of people, you typically fall between 40 and 60. The average age group, 40 and 60. But whatever it is, as long as you have a fluid stroke, right? So you're always pushing through, because water is always resisting you, right? So you need to have a consistent power production to keep going, or what will happen is you'll call it like a glide, right? You'll push, stop, push, stop, push, stop. And so you're bleeding energy at that point. And that's what this helps you do in essence.
Gotcha. Now,
without having someone there with a camera, and it actually gives you real-time objective feedback.
I'm curious, like, with your background, maybe it was in Florida where you started to have this affinity toward triathlons, but you don't commonly find it in Iraq, I'll tell you that. I don't think there's much water around that area for you to go for a swim from time to time. So where did this all come from? Obviously, it's wonderful how you take your experience and knowledge and blend it into this book, but how did it come about?
Yeah, so I've been an endurance athlete for many years. I was on the cycling team at West Point. I did try out for the tri team, but did get picked up. And rightfully so. The student that they picked up over me, he did great. He was awesome. But I've always had a strong bike leg. So I was picked up by the cycling team and raced for them for 3 years. Once I got out, I still continued to race in that semi-pro. I had a couple of teams. I think I earned maybe $15 racing as prize money. So that's how I can term that. I had the opportunity to race when I was a young officer over here in Germany against the Snyder team a few times. And racing with these guys, I did I did several USA crit series events back in the heyday, but still always like triathlon. And so once my road mountain bike career ended, or when I officially hung it up, I just picked up triathlon again. And a lot of that picked up back when I got back to Florida State to start my doctorate. I did a couple of triathlons at ULM. My advisor down there, Dr. Lisa Colvin, she was the head tri coach down there, got me back into it. And she's actually the one that turned me on to the whole PhD pipeline and helped me, get to where I wanted to be. And so that's really kind of how it started. But kind of putting it together with my background with the military, I really take a systematic approach to it all. So I worked operations for many years. I was the operations officer for the 709th MP Battalion here in, Bielefeld, Germany now. So kind of came back home with this job. That's how I approach planning and training and so forth with it. And so if you have a system, you have the ability to adjust when you start seeing different things. And that's what periodization is, but I do put a little bit of a military flavor on it. So one of the first things you do is that when you do any operation is you do a recon, right? You look at the intelligence, you see what you can get on the ME of the environment, stuff like that. You do the same thing. If someone's peaking for a single event, okay, you look at that event. So for example, someone's doing Ironman Florida, right? What are some of the key things for that event that they need? Well, typically choppy water, because you're swimming in the Gulf. You're always going to have a headwind on that bike course. Was it 73? Yeah. Oh man, it's a brutal headwind coming down that pathway, and it's going to be hot. It's Florida. So there's little things like that. Then okay, so you list down the what the environmental factors and what the course is, blah blah blah. Then you start looking at your opponents, right? Who are you competing with? Are you a pro? Are you an age grouper? Or are you just trying to compete, right? Little things like that. Then you start looking at the individual. What are their strengths and limiters? Do they have an injury? Stuff like that, right? And then you start to come to light, like, okay, you're starting to get a better picture of the sense of what needs to be accomplished based off what the client is able to do. And that gives you your pillars to be able to start creating your macro cycles or annual training plans, whatever you want to call it. And then you can start applying your philosophy, based, with that client's input, of course, right? To get there. And that's kind of how I look at it. And I'm a very analytical person when it comes to this type of stuff. I let the data guide where we go with stuff. We start off with starting point, but then we let the data guide. So we kind of call that flexible periodization.
And is that where you go with the book? Is that you dive into the deeper analytical side?
Yeah, that should be chapter 12, right? Chapters 11 and 12. So in chapter 12, I take everyone through a case study for a client of mine, Gear Omerson, who won Ironman Tallinn in 2019 for his age group. And I take everyone through what we did for that entire year and some change to get him to that point. And that was not the easiest year to get through because we had the beginnings of COVID at that point. And yeah, so he originally started to train for Ironman South Africa. Well, that got canceled because of COVID. There's another one I can't remember what we started targeting. That got canceled due to COVID. And so he was able to get into Tallinn, and luckily they didn't get hit until afterwards, which was great. And it worked out really well for him. So, a little bit, life occurs, let alone a pandemic.
Wow. And then what other kind of takes or slants do you feel that your book is taking that you don't commonly find in other kind of conditioning guidebooks?
The first thing is this is very rooted in science. And what I mean by that is everything that's laid out that we talk about is supported by peer-reviewed published journal articles and research. That's the first thing, right? So we know the base information is vetted very well and approved. And then secondly is like the swim training, right? This is the first, there's nothing out there that really talks about swimming with power, right? Using a power meter for swimming in the context of the sport. And then let alone applying power theory across all three sports to be able to create an actual program. This is the first one that does that. But it's not just a trade book, it's actually a textbook. Because my philosophy as a coach is to teach it, right? I tend to put myself out of a job because I tend to teach you. And I do that on purpose because as we're working with my clients, it's a finite relationship, whether it's 6 months or 6 years, right? On average, it's about 2.5 to 3 years we have with clients. So within that time period, I want to give you as much information as possible, so you understand you can make those smart decisions, moving on, right? And I did the same thing with this book. The publisher, Cognella, is actually a textbook company. So even though it doesn't read as a textbook, it is a textbook, and it's designed to teach you how to be able to apply this. That's actually why half the book is training plans across the different modalities of the multi-sport world. There's over 215 pages of workouts and training plans for marathon, swim, run, there's nothing out there for power training for swim, run, which is a new emerging sport in the multi-sport world. So little things like, of course, you got your Ironman plans, you got your regular triathlon plans, duathlon, aqua bike. So we cover all those in there as well. And what we try to do is, even though we cover power theory for swim, bike, run, we try to also show you that you can apply these principles to other components of multi-sport.
Gotcha. Do you delve into the technical aspects of like stroke technique, bike fitting, shoe wear, or gait patterns, anything like that?
Yes, we do. Not all of those, but for example, you had two of them: the swim and the gait. Right. For swimming, chapter 3. We really talk about the physics of swimming, right? And that's what I did my master's work on, is the physics of swimming and how you can create a power meter for swimming. So I know that that was a lot of my research. My first round of research is based off of that chapter. And so we had 10 researchers that pulled that research apart. So I know it's pretty solid. So that was my committee at University of Louisiana Monroe. Wow. But yeah, we talk about how you look at your front quadrant and how you produce the power and the physics behind it. So we talk about that. We do talk a little bit about the physiology of it as well.
With that work that you were doing, the research, but I'm curious, were there any surprises with the research? Were there things that came out going, wow, I had no idea about that?
Yeah, the fact that it actually could be measured. That was what was really surprising. We didn't think we'd be able to get a consistent power output. We would thought, because you had to do it old school. We had to put it against a force meter that was land based, and then you had a non-elastic tether tied to the swimmer, right? And then we had to line them up over a cage that we had underwater. So we had GoPros that measured from all 3 Cartesian planes, and we were able to line it all up. So we can look at, we were able to time it to where, right, we know this stroke is producing this force and stuff like that. And when we found it, even from the beginner swimmer to advanced swimmers, it was pretty consistent. So it was really interesting to see it. That was the surprise for me. And so I just knew it'd be a matter of time before the technology caught up and to be able to run with it. I just didn't expect it would occur within 7 years of my master's thesis.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious right now, if we'll step aside from the book and we'll come back to it in a little bit, but the work that you're doing right now in the Bavarian area of Germany, what is that looking like? What are you doing for human performance for Air Force, for military?
Yeah, so it's a new program. So we're building it from the ground up. The team is still really new. There's only a couple of us right now, but we have more coming in. But what we're trying to do is create a holistic program. And what we're talking about is a program that addresses the fitness side of it, strength conditioning, the recovery side, physical therapy, sleep, the mental side of it, the medical side, and then of course the nutritional side of it. Kind of hit all of those pillars that really affect human performance. And then also trying to help with the access to care for these guys as well, because it's a higher up tempo. They don't always have the time to get to the regular military facilities to be able to do what they do. So we're trying to bring that to them.
So are you basing this model, this holistic approach, on anything like professional sports teams and how they're utilizing athletic trainers, physical therapists, strength coaches, nutritionists, and the like, performance directors. Where are you getting this model from?
Yeah, so you hit it right on the nose. A lot of this is some of the best practices taken from the professional and collegiate sports world, right? Now, in the DoD, there are several different models out there. You got the POTIF program, H2F. There's several different versions out there, and we're doing our own flavor on it, based off the needs of our clientele or our population. So again, this comes back to doing that needs analysis, what we talk about in the book, and just more at an organizational level. Because go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering that with your needs analysis, I mean, within the normal fitness realm, we're looking at like body composition, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, aerobic capacity, and the like. I'm sure those are part of it, but what other elements are you looking at when you're considering a needs analysis?
Yeah, what are the recovery rates? How much fitness is being lost when they come back from an operation? What are they eating? It's really all of it. You just try to look at every little aspect, because again, it comes to those low 1% gains that occur over time over those different pillars. What it all comes back down to readiness. How quickly can we get that warfighter back ready to go for the next mission?
And what is the easy, the low-lying fruit? What are the ones where you're going, okay, we can easily crank up 1 or 2% here, and that's almost a no-brainer?
Is how much, at least in my opinion, and kind of my niche within the pillars, is how do we keep the fitness from backtracking when they come back from an operation or temporary duty away from home or a rotation for training, because when you're out there, you have reductions in sleep, nutritional quality is low, you're definitely not exercising, and so when you look at all those little elements, it's a cyclic pattern that just magnifies detraining, right? And so how do we get elements, certain pieces of equipment in their hands, different training routines, better foodstuffs, to be able to, instead of maybe the backtracking 10 steps, now it's only 7 at this point, right? How can we better maintain the fitness and performance when they're out executing? So when they come back to, back to garrison, that hurdle to rebuild is a little bit less.
So many programs deal with periodization. And for those listening, if you're not familiar with periodization, it is a systematic approach to training where you're allotting a certain amount of time for certain gains. And there's windows of opportunity that you're creating to get this person to their peak performance. But I gotta wonder, Doc, is that when you're dealing with the people you're dealing with, they're not necessarily professional or collegiate athletes who that's their role or that's their career. So they're going to have specific windows. You're dealing with guys that are going to be deployed, men and women for that matter, they're being deployed, but it's not necessarily a regimented schedule. So you don't have, put it lightly, you don't have an in-season, off-season, pre-season.
Yeah.
How do you address that chaotic nature?
That's the fun part of the job, right?
I bet it is.
That's the big puzzle, because they're always in season, right? It's always, if you look at it from a sports standpoint, they're always in that competition season. Now we have little blocks here and there that they take time off, they take leave and stuff, spend time with their families and recoup. And so we make the best of those, right? Sometimes we have large swaths, sometimes we only have a couple of weeks. And so what I do, it's a very data-driven approach to the training. I use a lot of force plate technology as one of the factors to be able to look at power production, especially for the lower body, right? So how can we? Is there a way to identify, changes in the power, whether it's acceleration or range of motion, and then some other testing as well. And that's actually been very beneficial. So we let the data kind of show us with our testing protocols to be able to focus the training on these guys when we have it to get them kind of back to where they need to based off our needs and needs analysis of their mission set.
So force plate technology, velocity-based training, basically, is that going to also tell you about when they're overtraining, as well as when they need to have more focus on their resting?
Yeah, it's just one data point, right? And so, it's the interaction with these guys. It's just knowing their schedule. But the other time in there is I give them forced recovery time. Based off what we're seeing over this past year, we've developed a kind of a recovery protocol based off pre and post deployment data testing, subjective reports that we receive from them, and even sitting down just talking with these guys, right? These guys and gals. And what we do is, so we find is there's sleep debt, you've got nutrition, you got energy consumption debt, stuff like that. So you got muscle wasting, you got to be training, So when they come back, it's automatic 7 to 10 days of recovery and slowly getting back into it, right? So within that, I like for that first 3 days when they're back, I have my mitts on them for the first 3 days. We're just really working on range of motion and flexibility. So it's yoga, big fan of yoga. Nothing fancy, just straight up yoga technique. And then working range of motion stuff, just calisthenics, lightweight, just working through the motion. Because when we're kind of in the strength cycle, I focus on what I call the big three: bench, squat, and deadlift, right? We don't get too much into the Olympic list just because, again, there's not enough time on station to properly train those, but they all know how to do those. And those are big functional movements that hit everything that we need. And then after that, we start adding some weight. We add in the endurance and stuff, and build them back up over the next couple of days. And then some people recover faster than others. So that's just where we look at heart rate data, whether it's resting heart rate, HRV, talking with these guys, stuff like that. And also looking at their the force plate scans again to see if there's been an improvement in the acceleration power and in the range of motion.
Yes. So, and then, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but it's the resting period where the body is going to achieve the healing and the strength building. It's not during the breaking down and tearing down process of the workouts themselves. So ultimately, sleep and proper rest is important. Are you monitoring that with these professionals?
We do. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. I mean, you've got wearable technology makes it very convenient. So across the spectrum, we've got Garmin's, we've got Apple Watches, Oura Rings. Big fan of the Oura Rings. These things are great. And right now, these are kind of emerging as the industry standard for wearable sleep technology. They're on par with a lot of your other active graphs out there. And so that's what we like about it. And we have databases that kind of bring in all these different lines of data to kind of put it all together, get a holistic picture of it. And a lot of these, I created all these dashboards for it to kind of give our leaders a quick snapshot of how people are doing based off certain key metrics that peer-reviewed research has shown us are working and are worth looking at when we're talking about human performance.
That's fantastic. Now, out of all of the elements that come into conditioning, what one is the one that is most needed, that is the area of weakness, shall we say? Is it the nutritional component? Is it the sleep? Is it the power? Is it the mobility? Where do you find on average that those that you work with, that really this is kind of a common ground where we really need to focus?
It's really all of it, right? Because it's not within the population, you have groups, right? So
Sure.
you've got, it's a different mesh of different backgrounds, personalities and stuff. So I never really say one, I need to focus on one more than the other. Is it, I have to know my audience. And so I know this group is a little more, okay, these guys and gals are more pre-positioned to, we need to work more on nutrition. Well, these guys, we need to work on their sleeping, stuff like that, right? So
Sure.
it's kind of, it's just addressing it all and knowing the audience. And that goes back once it needs analysis, but no, just, sit down and just talking, it's interacting with them. And that's one of the best parts of this is getting to interact with the different airmen and airwomen and just getting to know them on the personal level.
And as this program starts to develop and grow, where do you see it going? What's the next phase in growth development for this particular program?
Yeah, just trying to, bring the model on a larger scale, and then trying to, what I would like to do is bring the different resources of the other different models that I kind of mentioned earlier, like the H2F, the POTF model. Like in Italy, you've got the Cobra clinics that the PJs use down there, which is a completely different model, but it's more of a spoken wheel model. Really good on getting access to care down there. We had, so taking, working with them, work with the guys out of England, out of the Netherlands and stuff. And let's try to bring all of our resources online. So even though we all have different focuses, we have coverage over all the men and women across Europe. That's what I would ultimately love to do.
Very cool. Now, just want to come back around to the book as we're kind of coming near the end here. The title of your book, I don't think we mentioned that right now, and the publisher and where people can access it. Is it in an ebook form as well as print?
Yes, you have both. Actually, the ebook, the digital form just got released last week. The name of the book is Triathlon Training with Power. Excuse my English. It's published by Cognella Publishing, and I co-wrote the book with Hunter Allen. And so he's the CEO of Peaks Coaching Group, my coaching firm that I've had the pleasure to work for over 10 years now. He's also written several books. He wrote the original book on cycling with power, power-based cycling training with Dr. Coggin back in the early 2000s. So, worked that with him, and you can find this book on a couple of different places right now. It just hit Amazon. So the book is on Amazon right now, but you can also order it directly through Cognella Publishing or directly through Peaks Coaching Group at www.peakscoachinggroup.com. And if you order it through Peaks, you're going to get a signed version no matter what. So if that's something you want, there you go.
Excellent. I'll make sure that we get all the contact information and order information in the description that goes along with the podcast here. And you got it. Now, are you taking on clients, athletes, triathletes? And do you do it online as well, virtual?
Yeah. So that's the great part with, again, technology and wearables. So as a coach, as a triathlon and cycling coach, I do a lot of almost all of it is satellite coaching. All my clients right now are stateside, and I'm in Germany. So that it's great. It's a different puzzle piece. It's a great challenge, but it's worked out very well. So for example, again, go back to the guy in the book that I mentioned, Geir Omerson, who won that Ironman. He lived in Iceland when I was still living in the States. So it is possible. And it's actually not uncommon these days. If you look at a lot of your pro athletes, their coaches live in one country and these guys are competing in another.
Sure.
It's just, because the transfer of data over different platforms, whether it's, Training Peaks, Final Surge, Golden Cheetah. I actually think TriDot's now got a platform they're getting ready to release as well. Or whether it's just straight Garmin or even just email and files, right? The transfer of technology is pretty easy. It's now getting more and more towards almost real time.
Well, I can imagine that with the last almost 2 years of dealing with COVID, that the triathlon population has surged because you couldn't go into a gym, you couldn't do your normal thing, but you could always get on a bike, you could always go for a run, and if there was a pool nearby you had access to, you could probably go for a swim, or if there was a lake or something. So I'm sure that we're seeing an upsurge of triathlete participants. Would you agree with that?
I would. And honestly, it's funny that you mentioned that. Is you'll find a lot have not been able to swim because of pools, access to pools up maybe the last 6 months, it was very limited. For me, the first time I swam for the first time last weekend or 2 weeks ago in Italy in like almost 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Just due to travel and all that. And all my training has been with bands or on the Vasa trainer. So.
Well, that'll be interesting to see.
It's the same way. It will be.
Yeah.
I'm scheduled to do Ironman Frankfurt this year, so we'll see how it goes.
How many months away is that?
It's in June.
Okay.
So I got a lot of work to do.
And are things opening up there for you? Can you get to a pool now?
It was. Now it's kind of going back. We're actually in a high incident area right now, so you can, if you're vaccinated or you've had COVID, they're calling it the 2G plus protocols over here. You can get in, but you have to have an appointment. And so you have to go online and put in an appointment. For me, it's, I have maybe a 2-hour window on the weekend where I can go. I'll try to go this weekend, but we'll see what happens.
Wow. Well, good luck with that. I appreciate your time. And again, I'll make sure that all the order information and book information is in the description below. But good luck in come June and with the rest of the program you're doing. And that brings this episode of RockFit Files to a close. I just want to thank Dr. Chris Meyers coming on all the way from Germany and giving us a little insight in terms of triathlete training. If you want more information, look into the descriptions below the podcast to find out how you can order his book, how you can find more information about the work that he does. Until next week, have yourself a great one.